After a day at sea, we headed into Sydney on Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. Sydney used to be an industrial center. Now it is primarily a tourist, and it is in the heart of the Celtic influence on Cape Breton. So fiddling is a very great part of their culture. As the ship pulled into the dock, we saw their landmark, which is a very, very large fiddle put right in the area where everybody can see it. After we went ashore and looked in some of the shops, we came back on board for lunch and then went out for our excursion. We were going to the fortress of Louisburg, formerly the most important French possession in the New World. Louisburg's position, where it was across the main travel routes to Europe and to the fishing areas of the Grand Banks, made it extremely valuable, and there were numerous attacks on it by the British. Eventually they captured it, and after they captured it, they destroyed it. In the 1960s, the Canadian government decided to rebuild part of it as a historical reconstruction, and now about 25% of the original facility has been rebuilt according to the plans discovered in France. Since we were there in the off-season, there were not as many of the animateurs as they were called. There were numbers still acting as soldiers. The soldiers who would have been in charge of this fort would have been the French Marines. We saw inside the barracks, the chapel, and some of the quarters. And also got a demonstration of firing an old-fashioned musket. It was funny to see that nowadays the demonstrator had to put on earplugs and eyeglasses before they were allowed to fire. This particular building had been the center for the barracks and also the governor's quarters. Louisburg was a thriving town. The houses all had their gardens. They were well built. As you can see, they've been reconstructed very well. This probably would have been a rope walk and a ship's chandlery. We did run into one angry denizen. This sheep came out and started running at the fence. In the different houses, they have demonstrations. In one, the lady who was acting as a servant explained the luxury of chocolate and how it would have been used in those days. We each got a cup of chocolate, and after that, we went through the rest of the house and then toured some more of the town. This particular house was owned by the engineer who was in charge of the fortress. Like many government contracts, his house had gone more than 5 times over budget. Here you see some of the possessions that would have been held by this ordinary person in the town. And the ruins of some of the old buildings that still have not been reconstructed. Probably not much more work will be done because of the expense. There was a cross that marked Louisburg, and after the British conquered it, it was taken back to the colonies and was in Harvard. Eventually they gave it back on loan to the museum in Louisburg. This is the area down by the harbor, sort of the main water walk, and the main entrance to Louisburg from the sea. It's a little bit windy, as you can see from our friends. Along this main street there were hotels, small bars, and a wishing well. I think Noel was wishing the sun would come out and it'd get a little bit warmer. Our friends at Shortino's began the Olivos, and then Noel and I. As we moved over to one of the bastions, you're able to see another view of the town and the extent to which it has been reconstructed. But remember, this is only a small portion of what would have been a very, very busy little village. This particular bastion, as it was called, was intended to protect the harbor. You can see the cannons there. And in the background, the main barracks that we looked at and the covered way, which runs along the walls. The waters around Louisburg are very rough. We headed back into Sydney. You see the fiddle on the dock. And then we sailed off on the next leg of our voyage to Prince Edward Island.